Okay, so we have Jeff back with us today to follow the next step in the process, and that is the repositioning. So I have a feeling about 3 possible repositionings here for different types of roles in the software industry, but we're going for the most obvious first, which is the Ruby on Rails, the software development engineering angle. And, sometimes when I send this repositioning, it's a little bit jarring to people because first of all, it's a whole new way to see yourself and present yourself. But the first thing I want to ask, especially because if everyone recalls, Jeff has his PhD, which means you know a lot about positioning because that's what a whole research paper is about. And I'm hoping you at least see the logic in what I'm presenting in here as far as what matters is what matches, we're answering the question. And then once again, though, so I use a previous inspiration Ruby on Rails resume that did result in the type of incomes that Jeff is looking for to demonstrate. So another thing you're getting here is like, what does an ideal candidate look like? What is my competition going to look like?
Yeah.
And then how do we step into that then? Or is the positioning correct? And if it's not correct, then we need to talk about that. So let's go ahead. I'm going to let Jeff talk here because I have submitted the repositioning and this is our first time talking about it. What do you think?
Okay. Well, it's different. It shouldn't be a surprise, but it is in some sense that, I do know about positioning and I know about like trying to get somebody to care about the things you can bring to the table. Absolutely.
Right.
But at the same time, this is not the sort of resume I would have come up with from all my career training in high school and college. You know what I mean?
That's for sure. Or career services at the university doesn't.
Yeah, I feel like we all have those nuggets of wisdom that still stick with us and are probably true, but there's probably a lot of stuff that we can change too. One of the nuggets of wisdom is use strong action verbs or avoid using the pronoun I, which I tend to do on LinkedIn when I'm in a position because I like to describe what I'm doing so I'll remember it when I get back to the resume later. But it doesn't, things like that are really solid advice for resumes, I feel like. But there are things that definitely got me stuck in the traditional style resume where you have everything listed reverse chronologically, and it's more like what I think of as an academic as a CV. Like, what did you do?
Exactly. A CV is much lengthier. That can go up to 15 pages, sometimes longer.
Yeah.
Very robust in your research stream.
Yeah.
Though a resume is much more compact.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wasn't getting a whole lot of guidance about that. I asked about shortening. I asked, is a 1-page resume necessary? They say, no, I have a hard time getting everything down into 1 page. And I see here we have more page straight. I don't think people question the standard narrative or the standard resume format and the way that you present your work. It very much feels like what I was taught and what I continue to do until seeing this repositioning is talk about what you did, talk about the titles you held, and when you did them and where you did them. It's all about the facts, right? And that doesn't necessarily lend itself to optimizing the resume for what you're trying to go for.
Right. So this still is in reverse chronology. One of the devices I use, especially when someone is, in your case, this is not the same thing. So just to remind everyone that in programming, it's possible to have corp-to-corp relationships where it's essentially a business-to-business sale. And we're going to be using that in this case to fill in a pocket of time. So we're going to be presenting all the things you've done as an individual corporation in a bucketed period of time where you were also teaching.
Yeah.
And because we're not going for a teaching role, the teaching is on the resume because it shows dedication to your field and it also shows dedication to grooming the next generation. It's a really important message to send. However, it drops down to the bottom. If we were going for teaching, it would rise right up to the top. So this is the difference between the positioning concept. And, but in this case, it is an aspect of what you do, but what we need to show, the answer we're trying to get for the highest dollar role that can be obtained for you, we need to answer the question. So it is still reverse chronology. Also, we want to show a pattern of rising up either in scope of responsibility, in title, And so that you'll see that too, is that the resume is created to really show you rising up in your career.
Right on. Yeah.
So then the next piece here that is something that you can go through is if there's things on here. So sometimes when I get these really technical resumes, I'm not a programmer. So this is a conversation between you and I about how would things be said professionally, technically, right? Not the I statement. That lends itself to the concept that you are a storyteller, right? So the I, and staying really formal in how you present. Obviously, that is not standard practice in any resume writing, but that was less of the issue here and more of how can we demonstrate that you are worth 150 to 250 grand in the market, because the position that you had was not saying that. So that's what our goal here is to demonstrate the knowledge that you do have and so that it positions you for those roles. Now, there might be things on here that you don't have or you can't defend, or maybe there's something a little bit different. So usually when I send a position to someone, I'll say, if you literally cannot speak on this, talk about it, it doesn't exist in your world, you can cross it out. If it's something that exists in your world, but it's a little bit different, then you can rewrite that line and send it back to me. You don't have to have it perfect. I'll pare it down. And then, what I also asked Jeff to do was give me a list of projects, because in that case, that's really important, especially under this corp to corp concept. And we can really drive it home. I mean, I achieved really good results with this concept. So, tell me what you think about that.
Well, it was really nice to see you use that, because that's something that I've kept on my resume for a while to cover the fact that I was traveling and seeking remote work and taking contracts and doing all of that. I was trying to find a bucket, a place that I could store all of that knowledge and information on the resume, even though it wasn't necessarily a long-term relationship with anyone.
Right.
It was things, that were coming up here and there that were keeping me in the market. So it's really nice to be able to see that still serving that purpose, and also giving the focus to the C2C aspect of it, which is not something that I really had appreciated as like the way to position it.
Yes.
It was just like, oh, this is the LLC I got, and it's just how I do contracts. Right.
It's like actually critically important, especially.
Yeah, I had no idea.
And other people, even if they're not in the programming field, if they're facing a gap, a lot of times they do. Like, I'll ask people, what were you doing in this time period? And they're like, oh, I was fixing up houses and selling them. Oh, okay, contracting, blueprinting, estimating, you know what I mean? Like, these things just start rolling down my head of this is how we can position this time frame. And that's what we're going to do here. And it's really going to elevate you. And to the point that if the latest two roles that you did more full-time, they were about 2 to 3 year stints, weren't exactly positioning you for the role we wanted, we could switch this around and really leverage that C2C in a different way. You've got a pretty big name on there, though, that I don't want to remove, because they're pretty known to be great payers, and, it's a pretty big industry. So, and actually your other one is healthcare, so I don't really want to remove that one either, but I would.
I understand that. Yeah.
Yeah, because healthcare is very hot. There's a lot of development activity in healthcare right now. So, okay, so what other questions do you have for me as you start, looking at this and saying, putting your touch on there?
Let me pull that back up. See.
I also, when I write these things, I put notes in the margins of what my logic is. Did those help you?
Yeah, they were helpful in understanding what you were doing.
Good.
With it. I see here that we have just a bucket of skills at the top, which is not something that I had thought of doing, where you're just like dumping like the buzzwords basically right up there up top.
Yeah, and what that helps with is, and I know from the PhD program, about content scans, and that's what the ATS is based on. So there's that, and then there's in web development, there's the top of the fold, meaning you have to capture them immediately, and usually the call to action's on the right. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of this concept of not only does this hit the content scan in the applicant tracking system if they scan by keywords, because they may scan by keywords instead of title, but the next piece is that once they open it, it's like, bam, Jeff is totally qualified for this. I want to look at the rest. So it satisfies the 5-second scan.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So everything does have its purpose on here. Now, I will say in this field, this will look very different in the other two positionings because I want to call them softer skills. It's just different.
I'm curious to see how those turn out.
Yeah, and we'll get to that after we come to an agreement on our buckets and work on this one, because I will use this to shape the other ones. But it's not going to be as focused. A lot of these skills will drop down to the bottom, and we're going to be focusing more on how you work, because in the product management side, there's not an expectation to really have a programmer. So I feel like that's going to potentially be an advantage. So we are doing A/B testing here too. So there's a whole sales marketing concept of, okay, what's going to hit and what's going to bring in the biggest dollar, and also what's going to bring you the most joy, and all those things are going to come together. They're all going to marry in this process of searching for the job and interviewing for the job and having conversations.
I feel like you mentioned A/B testing to a scientist, and you explain what it is, and they're like, "Oh, so you're just doing an experiment."
It's just an experiment.
It's an experiment, which is why I was like, "Oh, I get this A/B testing thing." It was one of the things I was really nerding out on with one of my with actually one of these companies on the resume. And we've got that there, yeah.
Good.
I love that. I love it when we can practice the things that we do in other spheres of our lives. So,
well, Jeff, this is a great example of different languages. In academia, we say an experiment. In sales and marketing, we say A/B testing. Well, particularly marketing. So this is a big impact that I like to make on people. Is sometimes we have to know the business language of where we're going, and where do we find it? We find it in the job ads. In my case,
absolutely.
Yeah, I also find it just based on, I've run this search. This sounds like as I talk to a client, and also the resume is talking to me, as I break down their previous resume, I'll find different things like, okay, there's, like, for instance, there might even be a UX storytelling thing here, but is that going to hit your dollar? So then we have to talk, then I might dismiss that angle because I don't think it is, or maybe, you don't have some of the creative stuff that they'd be looking for. But the storytelling, examining, working with the UX teams, getting the customer journey, those are all things that you have done.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
So
been very lucky with that.
Yeah. So, we can talk about that too, but I want to get this one. I do feel like this is going to be the workhorse, meaning I feel like this one is going to deliver certainly the highest amount of hits and potentially the highest dollar hits, potentially. But I might be wrong about that. And that's where the experiment and the testing comes in. And I think candidates sitting at home that are not working with, someone who has this weird mastermind thing going on with me, is that probably not going to test multiple angles. I don't know many people that would run.
If you said to me, and you weren't going to help me, if you were just like, this is the best advice I have, do 3 different searches, I'd be like, are you kidding? Oh wait,
yeah.
There's no way, because it just, what's that even look like? That's like not something I've ever done or ever thought about doing before, and it just sounds like 3 times the work for the same amount of reward, right? And naive, right? But knowing a little bit more now about how these tracking systems work and how recruiting itself works, I'm starting to see the value.
Yeah.
And having somebody on your side to help it makes all the difference in the world for me.
Yeah, it's a different process. And I think a lot of people think, okay, a job search should be easy. I shouldn't have to, like, people will pay for lifestyle coaching, relationship coaching, health coaching, right? And there's something about the job search. They're like, I should be able to do this on my own. Well, yeah, you can if you want a lateral, poopy move. You want to get exactly what you've been getting. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, okay, what else do you need from me before you start going through this?
Let me see. I have mostly just comments on the surprise and delight I have at seeing some of these changes. I guess I do have some questions, but I guess they're not super crunchy. Like I see here for the corp to corp, we need to work on the list of projects, which makes a lot of sense to flesh that out. And then it looks like we may have been playing with the title. And I noticed actually also on a few other places we've sort of stuck a keyword in the title that I wouldn't have necessarily done.
Yeah.
So I mean, it makes sense. Do you want to talk about that?
Well, I do keyword stack titles, and this will change depending on positioning. And that's another great thing when someone has done their own work is it's easier for them to see, oh yeah, I did wear 12 hats. But if I present 12 hats, I'm not going to get any of those hats, right? So I need to present for
I
my
like wearing 12 hats.
yeah,
Actually,
well, and you probably will wherever we're going to get you anyway.
I hope so, but we need to find it. Yeah,
We'll find it. We'll find it.
yeah,
So
absolutely.
this that's going to change, and a lot of people, so they're able with their business to say, oh yeah, you're right, like I did this, I can see that. Sometimes it's a little bit weird to see the keyword stacking in your title. This is that concept of the crusty narrative and letting employers decide your future. Why should your previous employers decide your trajectory or the level that you were working at and the scope of your work based on how they titled you?
That's a good question, especially because I have had positions before where there's a lot of in the positions I've had, they haven't necessarily been all like standard engineering positions. I'll be coming in and doing they know I'm coming in wearing a variety of hats. And we have all of these different titles in software that sort of sound the same, but may not be the same. And so there's a lot of ambiguity around titles anyway. So like, do I call myself a software developer? Do I call myself a software engineer? For a while, it was, am I a programmer? It was those sorts of questions. And then the question of like, well, this company calls what I do senior software development, but another one calls it software engineering too.
That's
Or
exactly right.
yeah, and so you just don't even know what to put on the resume. And sometimes, I mean, I feel like the people that were really giving me the best advice when it came to resumes before, they were like, put whatever down in the title that your references would support, right? Put down the thing that helps you find the positions that you're looking for next. So like if the question is, am I a software developer or software engineer? And the jobs you're applying to say software engineer, go ahead and think about putting software engineer down for that title instead.
Well, that's definitely the smarter method for how the technology is built because that's the keyword stacking concept.
Yeah. Okay.
That being said, I want to speak to references. People put way too much weight on their references. They're very rarely involved anymore. Yes, I'm not going to say never. And then you do want references who are going to support your narrative. This advice can sometimes change, meaning sometimes I really need references on there that I just know maybe they've gotten to a certain level. It's a very niche niche industry, and references are going to make an impact. Okay. And it's even less references. They just know people. So, but it's actually really rare, Jeff, especially we're going to be doing a remote search across the nation. The likelihood of people knowing each other, and being able to call and say, hey, tell me about this Jeff guy is very unlikely. Point. Okay. But here's the next piece, the background check. So this ends up being really important because people also misunderstand how these operate. Okay. So essentially, when you get a job offer, you negotiate, everything is good, you're moving forward, they do the background check. We're not talking about the drug test, although that's something that I always tell on the contract. I'm like, if something's going on, especially with THC, you got to tell me because there are solutions. But I'm not going to sit here and talk about that in here. But we have saved background checks. Okay, so
that's great.
so then there's the more what we're talking about, and that is verifying title, employer, time of work, and pay. They don't do that. Here's what happens. There's a company in the Philippines or Singapore. They call in, they have a little scorecard. They call into payroll for the company. Payroll will only tell them dates of employment. So they put the dates of employment on the scorecard and they put a check like, yes, we have verified that Jeff worked at this organization. And they do put the time frame, but we actually have wiggle room there because, and for one reason, the HR does not go back and cross-reference the scorecard. They don't say, okay, did he list this exact date? No, that's why exact dates are, kind of irrelevant here. I mean, you don't want to go crazy and say you were somewhere for 17 years.
No.
Okay. But when it comes to your business, let's say, okay, there's no one to call into. If that's the case, it's the C2C, then you would be submitting either your first page of your tax return for those years is what they'll ask for. They might ask for maybe contract, like the contract, something that's showing that you were paid during that time frame. So I have to tell you, I mean, knock on wood, I have never lost an offer because of a background check. Never.
Oh, that's great.
So
I won't be your first.
No, you're not going to be. And if it ends up being government, because this actually happened to someone who referred to you, like even though I had presented it under his C2C bucket, he broke it out. Now that is a much higher level. Financial services and government, they do much more of a probe. And it's very different. They don't send it off to Singapore, Indonesia. But the vast majority of people we're going to be talking to do use these services, and it's like I said, we don't lose it. There's ways to manage it. And then of course, the one thing that you really can never say, you can never really totally flub is the education. It's the easiest thing to verify. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay. I hope I answered your question, but
You do.
Yeah, that's not a concern at all. But it might take a little extra effort on the back end to list things out.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. Is there anything else before?
Yeah, it's just one moment. I did have another question. I'm trying to jog my memory. I should have.
Well, and to give the audience an example of what I'm talking about here, you were making applications while you were doing your graduate program.
Yes.
And, a lot of times there's graduate research, graduate assistantships, graduate. We're basically presenting that as the work that you did. That might be a stipend, that might be an internship, that might be unpaid. It might be many things. Doesn't matter. It happened. It happened. Right. And all of that is explainable.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm glad to see it's still there, because it was a big part of my life and a big part of my narrative and actually becoming a software developer. So that's great. I think the only other thing that I wanted to ask about was, I guess it was more specifics about what other buckets we saw me in, because the resume I gave you, right? Obviously it's generic, it's general, it's not very focused. And I have a diverse career that I really enjoy.
Yeah.
But we removed some of for example, for one of the positions, we removed some of the talk for UX. And that made a lot of sense.
That made
a lot of sense.
We are probably going to be including the customer journey back in there. I don't know if I can hit your number. I don't know if I can hit your number in just UX. Can I get you UX? Yes, I can.
Got it.
I'm not saying I've never gotten anyone a UX that high, but 150K and plus for UX, it's upper level.
Yeah.
Well, we're almost going. I mean, 150K for these other roles is mid-level, if not IC, or high level IC. So,
right.
Yeah, and then when you start pushing to 200, I mean, anytime you start really pushing over 150, certainly over 175, I mean, you're going to be managing people, pretty much. Right. There might be some generalities, but so I always say I don't like to talk about exceptions. I like to talk about general rules. What's generally 75, 85% of the time going to happen. So, but we can look at it. I'm not getting a good feel for that getting you the number.
Yeah, well, that's why I brought it up. Is I was just wondering if you saw that fitting into a different bucket, a different approach, a different positioning, or what. The reason I put it in there was because it's actually one of the more interesting parts of what I did there. Not to say that I'm a UX expert at all. It's just something that I really enjoyed, and so that's something that I like talking about, especially when product comes up or if I interview with a product person. I like to bring up those experiences because I like working directly with those people.
Right. Let's see. I'll show you what it looks like, and then we can decide if you can step in.
Sounds perfect.
Okay. Anything else?
That's it for me.
Okay. All right. So we will check in on it and, put everything together here as we start finalizing these resumes. But your job now is to send me back a draft based on what I presented here. This is more straight up Ruby on Rails software engineering. And then we're going to riff on that into different angles.
Okie dokie. That sounds good.
Okay, Jeff. Have a great day.